Yo guys, it's your boy. Today we're talking about old world cathedral bells used to heal human body and ward off demonic frequencies and demons itself. It's like a different rabbit hole you should get into. Let's just get into it.
Or in a side corridor of the Musée des Arts et Métiers in Paris, a junior archivist cataloguing acoustic instruments paused at an unlabeled wooden crate. Dust moved in the air like slow smoke. Inside lay a small collection.
That's why they actually remove giant bells from the churches and cathedrals itself. These bells were used to ward off demons and shit. No wonder they actually removed that shit.
A cracked wax cylinder, a folded blueprint of a cathedral choir vault, a placard whose ink had been carefully washed away, leaving only the impression of letters pressed into card. The official inventory for that year lists the crate as miscellaneous organ studies, provenance uncertain. Yet the blueprint, dated 1871 and signed in a precise engineer's hand, depicted not pipes but concentric niches carved behind an altar, annotated with numbers that looked less like dimensions and more like frequencies. When the cylinder was played once, briefly, it did not contain music. It contained a single held tone, and the soft rustle of people breathing. History remembers progress, but forgets what it replaced. The light flickered once over the rolled blueprint, then went out. By 18th of May, 1863, in the chapter archives of Notre Dame de Paris, a clerk carefully recorded repairs to the great organ. Outside, rain gathered in the gutters. Inside, candlelight trembled along the vaults. The ledger describes tuning, maintenance, corrections to excessive resonance, and nothing more. The cathedral, the document...
All these old world cathedrals are actually burned down. That's what I said. A lot of things has been burned down, whether intentionally, and they've been remodeled to get rid of every evidence of what medieval churches actually is. Get rid of ancient advanced technology actually used in building of these churches to get rid of any sort of evidence that point to that. These guys has been very crafty in remodeling churches, saying that these kinds of things were just a fashion statement, like bells and the sacred geometry on windows. These are just fashion statements. Has nothing to do with purifying the human body or emitting healing frequencies and shit. This is a fashion statement.
insists was a house of worship and music, not a laboratory. Yet on the same page, in a different hand and a different ink, a marginal note appears beside a cost entry. Patients again report warmth in the chest during long Kyrie. No patients are listed. No records of any infirmary exist within the nave. Later annotations, stamped 1872, simply overwrite the term with a dark line of ink. The camera lingers on stone ribs curving overhead, the rose window casting faint-coloured light in the morning mist. A cantor's solitary note hangs in the air, then decays into a soft low hum that outlasts the visible gesture. A whispered recollection from a 19th century pilgrim's diary appears on screen. They said the music eased the lungs. No priest called it healing. The official narrative calls these spaces devotional, not medical. The contradiction in the ink, a crossed-out word, a wandering hum, remains unexplained. Today, modern concert halls in Paris still borrow the same vault proportions, but list them under optimal reverberation, not treatment. The question of what that reverberation did to the human body is left in the margins, like a note someone tried to erase. On 2nd of November 1878, in a modest workshop in Cavaillon, southern France, organ builder Etienne Marot signed the delivery documents for 42 new pipes destined for Lyon's Basilica of Fourvière. The day was cold and bright. Frost smoked from the mouths of workers as they carried polished metal under a weak sun. Official contracts from the diocesan office describe the commission as purely artistic, for the glorification of the liturgy. Among Marot's surviving papers, held today in a regional archive box dated 1901, there is an anomaly. A single sheet of calculations labelled Réponse du corps, response of the body. It lists lengths and diameters beside notes like calming of the heart, pressure in the limbs, euphoria in weak patients. The sheet is undated, but watermarks place the paper around 1875, 3 years before the Lyon contract. A later archivist pencil, added in 1932, labels the page dismissively speculative, unscientific. Outside the workshop window, the documentary's camera imagines fog lifting from tiled roofs, the metallic clink of tools, and an organ pipe struck lightly, producing a clear A that hangs in the air. Beneath it, a deeper, almost inaudible subharmonic vibration seems to pulse against the wooden walls. A single line is quoted from a letter Marot allegedly wrote to a local priest. Some tones make men weep, others make their pain recede. I do not know why, only that the walls remember. The official catalogue calls him a craftsman.
Only not just about the sacred healing frequencies, but even the windows. There's sacred geometry, and actually sunlight has to pass through these windows, emitting a form of a purifying light itself. I mean, these were the advanced technology that actually embedded in churches and shit. But modern architecture considered this as a fashion statement at that time. It's just architecture, old medieval architecture at that time. Nothing special about it. Everything has been, you see, everything in this ancient cathedrals has been built with intentionality and purpose. and now it's disregarded altogether.
The discarded sheet suggests a researcher in acoustic physiology ahead of his time. Modern acoustic engineers in hospitals now use similar tables, but none bear Marot's name. On 9th of September 1886, a crowded square outside Chartres Cathedral filled with pilgrims. The air was warm, slightly humid. Bells tolled overhead, their strike followed by a long, shimmering decay that flowed across the crowd like a wave. Parish reports from that year describe unusual numbers of the sick attending feast days, and gratitude offerings later hung in the nave. Crutches, braces, votive paintings. The official diocese chronicle for 1887 attributes these recoveries to faith alone, insisting no medical claims were ever made. Yet a folded pamphlet in the same volume, produced by a local physician and dated 1885, describes temporary relief of chronic pain during prolonged exposure to choral rehearsals in the transept, especially when positioned beneath the crossing vault. The pamphlet is bound into the chronicle upside down, as if by accident. A remembered statement, preserved only in a journalist's notebook, flickers on screen. I walked in with a weight on my chest, a woman reportedly told the doctor. And after the credo, it felt like it had been sung out of me. The camera traces sunlight beams cutting through incense, dust motes swirling, the choir launching into a sustained chord. As the sound swells, the stone arches seem to vibrate, producing a gentle tremor felt more than heard. A timestamp discrepancy appears. The chronicle claims renovations to the choir stalls occurred in 1884, but receipts for stonework on newly carved niches are dated 1888. No explanation is offered for the gap. Today, wellness centres broadcast curated healing frequencies through speakers, reproducing effects once experienced beneath stone vaults. None of their promotional brochures mention Chartres. By 14th of January 1892, in a lecture hall at the Faculté de Médecine de Paris, gas lamps hissed as Professor Jules Renard addressed students on the limits of spiritual interference in treatment. The temperature was low. Attendees sat wrapped in coats, breath faintly visible. His published lecture, preserved in a medical journal from that year, insists that any reports of relief in churches must be understood as psychological suggestion. In the back of the hall, a stenographer captured his words on thin paper, now browned and fragile. In the margins of the shorthand pages, stored today in a medical faculty archive, another hand has added a small note beside Renard's dismissal of church acoustics. But why do some frequencies calm delirium? No signature accompanies the question, only the date 1893, added later in a lighter ink. A small engraving shown briefly in the journal illustrates a patient in a hospital ward with blind.
And if you don't believe in astral frequencies actually healing your body, you're like retarded. Like there are actually like frequencies that actually like calm your body down, like reduce your cortisol, and that's 100% scientifically proven. Like there are frequencies that spike your cortisol also, like, and I think people should actually look into like what frequencies actually like heal the body and shit.
Drawn and silence imposed as therapy. No mention is made that only 3 streets away, a basilica's evening bells were known to bring the same patient to tears and sleep. A rumour, recorded decades later in a nurse's diary, surfaces as voiceover. We were told not to discuss the music cures. It made the professors angry. As the chapter closes, the documentary fades between the clinical echo of the lecture hall and the long reverberation inside a cathedral nave, letting the difference in sound tell its own story. Modern hospitals now use controlled soundscapes to reduce patient anxiety, devices calibrated by engineers. The line that Renard tried to draw between medicine and sacred acoustics blurred again, but his margins stayed quiet. It was meant to be progress, but progress often comes at a cost. If history is written by survivors, who erase the rest? On 3rd of March 1890, a surveyor from the Austro-Hungarian Ministry of Public Works stood beneath the central dome of St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, taking measurements for a planned restoration. Outside, snow fell in slow wet flakes. Inside, cold air magnified every footstep. His official report, filed that spring, concludes that the dome's shape is irregular and not designed for acoustic symmetry. Yet a set of unlabelled glass plate photographs, rediscovered in 1971 in a cardboard box at the same ministry, show something else: small stone protrusions along the balcony, spaced in a pattern only visible when viewed from above. One photograph, dated in the emulsion as 1889, captures 2 men standing at opposite sides of the gallery, heads leaned toward the wall. A pencil caption, later scratched out, once read, "Whisper test successful." Visitors' anecdotes from 1891 describe a curious phenomenon. "One speaks to the stones," wrote a traveller in her notebook, "and the stones answer far away. The dean said it was a trick of the devil, the sacristan said it calmed the nerves." The surveyor's printed report includes no mention of the gallery's whispering effect. It lists cracks, measurements, and costs, but its date contradicts the photographs by 1 year. The images show scaffolding that the report claims was erected only in 1891. As the camera glides along the dark curve of the gallery, the soundtrack isolates a barely audible, sibilant echo, repeating words we cannot quite make out. Modern tourist brochures now highlight the Whispering Gallery as a curiosity. None mention that it once appeared in an official file under a title that no longer exists. On 27 June 1879, in a chilly back room of the Royal Institution in London, experimental physicist Edmund Hargreaves recorded data from a brass resonance tube. The official logbook for that day notes tests of tuning forks, air columns, and cathedral-like reverberation simulations. But between the carefully ruled lines of the log, another document hides a narrow inserted ledger, discovered when the binding was repaired in 1958. On its pages, 2 columns. One lists frequencies in hertz, the other, short notes, pulse slows, head pressure, tears, sleep 10 minutes after exposure. Some entries are marked with small crosses and the names of English cathedrals, York, Durham, Canterbury. No dates accompany these notes. A quiet voiceover reads from a private letter Hargreaves wrote to a colleague in 1880, preserved in a separate archive. There is something in these vaults that behaves as though the stone were a second instrument, tuning not just the sound, but the listener. The official published paper on his work, printed in 1881, omits any reference to human responses. It presents the experiments as purely acoustical, yet a timestamp discrepancy surfaces. The paper references preliminary cathedral measurements of 1877, while the resonance tube in the logbook is labelled as having been built in 1878. The camera cuts between old ink on yellow paper, the gleam of brass under gaslight, and modern MRI scans of brains exposed to specific sound frequencies, subtly drawing a line between Hargreaves' uncredited observations and today's research into binaural beats and therapeutic sound. In the archive, the inserted ledger still bears no catalogue number. Officially, it is a loose sheet, likely misfiled. Unofficially, it reads like the first map of a healing soundscape. In the early morning fog of 21st October 1883, residents near Milan's Duomo woke to an unusual silence. The North Transept bell, known locally as La Consolatrice, the Comforter, did not ring. The municipal record for that day, preserved in the Archivio di Stato di Milano, lists routine matters only, market permits, minor repairs, nothing about bells. Yet a black and white photograph, taken just a year prior in 1882, shows the bell in place, suspended in its timber frame. A label on the back, in the photographer's hand, reads, "Rung nightly for the afflicted, fevers, melancholia." When a later print of the same image appeared in an ecclesiastical journal in 1890, the caption had changed. Removed during modernization, date unknown.
That's crazy. Like, there's been a lot of evidence that actually points to bells were used to heal certain ailments and illness. Like, on the mental side, it's crazy. And why they were removed in the first place.
Rumor collected in a 20th century oral history interviews an elderly sacristan who recalls, "They said the bell made certain people too calm. Doctors complained. One day it was simply gone, no ceremony. Humidity beads on the cathedral's carved marble, the camera tracking rainwater running in thin veins down statues. In the bell tower, dust lies thick where the bell once hung. New smaller bells occupy adjacent beams, their notes brighter, their decay shorter. A contradictory timestamp emerges. A maintenance invoice for removal of large north bell is dated 1879, 4 years before the silent morning the sacristan remembers, which is wrong. The document, or the memory recorded decades later, modern sound walks through Milan, highlight ambient noise and urban rhythm. No tour lists the frequency of La Consolatrice, or the effect its long, low ringing reportedly had on sleepless residents. These anomalies are not proofs, only questions given weight and date. If history is written by survivors who ensured some voices would never carry. On 5th April 1871, in a dim office of the Bureau des Monuments Historiques in Paris, architect Louis Vernier submitted a blueprint for the restoration of the apse in a lesser-known cathedral in Reims. The day was overcast. Damp coals seeped through stone walls. His official plan, stamped and approved, describes aesthetic enhancement and structural reinforcement, but a second, almost identical blueprint, discovered in 1904 in the crate from the opening hook, contains subtle differences. Tiny cavities.
Are you telling me all these organ pipes are like built for like decoration and shit? Like, for like normal harmonics activity? Like, you gotta be kidding me.
Carved behind the choir stalls, arranged in a sequence that
Bro, look at the sacred geometry on the window itself. You know this shit's not. It actually like aligns with the zodiac of the stars itself. You know, this is not just like architectural decoration. Like, it has intentionality and purpose. It has stelios to it.
Responds not to standard architectural ratios, but to the intervals of a Gregorian scale. Next to each cavity, Vernier penciled small numbers, 64, 96, 128, values that, in modern notation, resemble frequencies more than distances. A short note in his hand, in the margin, reads, "When the chant sustains this tone, the chest relaxes." The official record claims the restoration was completed in 1873. Yet a stonecutter's ledger from Reims lists specialised work on hidden niches behind choir woodwork in 1875, 2 years later. No updated blueprint exists for that year. Visuals linger on sunken cavities behind carved wood, light just barely reaching their edges. As a choir intones a sustained note, the soundtrack isolates a subtle secondary vibration emerging from the stone, like a low heartbeat. Today, acoustic consultants design diffusing panels and bass traps using similar cavities, now described in equations and CAD drawings. Vernier's name appears in no modern textbook on acoustics. His marginal note remains folded inside a blueprint, its ink fading, its frequencies still legible. By 12th of February 1895, the monastery infirmary attached to the Cathedral of Burgos, Spain, recorded an unusual series of visits. The weather was raw and windy. Drafts turned corridors into quiet wind tunnels. A surviving infirmary register lists patients suffering from hysteria, melancholy, and palpitations. Beside several names, a curious annotation appears, taken to Nave for exposure to evening chant. The official church history of Burgos, published in 1902, omits any mention of this practice, describing only traditional sacraments for the sick. Yet tucked into the infirmary register is a loose sheet dated 1896, written by an unnamed monk. a table of tones and durations. Beside one tone, he writes, relieves trembling in hands. Beside another, induces sleep in agitated youth. At the bottom, a final line, longer exposure causes headaches, must limit. Witness testimony comes from a traveller's letter, preserved in a private family archive, recalling a winter...
Yo, they have harmonic frequencies for every kind of solution for sleepiness, to solve mental stress. They have every fucking harmonics in ready for that. That's kind of crazy.
Visit in 1895. They seated the pale ones beneath the crossing. When the choir held a single note, I saw some of them sway as if rocked by an invisible hand. Snow dust the cathedral's outer buttresses. Inside, warm candlelight pools on stone. The choir sustains a D, and the camera moves slowly along rows of patients seated against pillars, faces softened by sound. A timestamp discrepancy arises. The infirmary register's experiment notes begin in 1895, but the cathedral's organ, according to a separate restoration record, was not retuned until 1897 to match international pitch. Which tuning did the monk's table describe? Modern therapeutic sound sessions now boast carefully calibrated frequencies for relaxation and recovery. Their marketing language echoes the monk's anonymous notes, but his authorship and his warnings about overexposure remain buried in a drawer. On 8th of August 1888, at the International Congress of Hygiene and Demography in Vienna, an obscure presentation was scheduled in a small side room on the effects of prolonged reverberant sound on the nervous system. The official program lists it under miscellaneous. The speaker, Dr. Pavel Novak, a physician from Prague, never published the accompanying paper. A surviving abstract in the Congress proceedings, however, summarizes his claim that certain churches in Prague, Krakow, and Budapest share identical ratios of height to width in central naves, creating a stable reverberation time that appears to soothe patients.
Of course, paper was not published. Who is not surprised? Things like this would never get published.
With neurasthenic symptoms. The abstract is dated 1887, 1 year before the Congress. A map reproduced in Novak's hand, discovered in his estate papers in 1923, connects dots across Central Europe, marking cathedrals and basilicas built or restored in the mid-19th century. Besides some, he has written notes. Headache after 20 min. Euphoria and calm. Possible therapeutic use. Along the map's margin, someone later scribbled in red pencil. Superstition. Do not include in final archive. A recollected remark from a fellow delegate appears in a memoir. He spoke as if churches were clinics in disguise. No one wanted that argument. The camera overlays Novak's hand-drawn map with modern satellite images, tracing similar volt ratios in train stations, concert halls, and government buildings constructed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The pattern suggests continuity, the same geometry, the same reverberation sweet spots, transposed into secular spaces. The timestamps don't align perfectly. Some buildings Novak marks as restored by 1860 show completion plaques from 1874. Whether he miscopied dates or followed another unofficial chronology, the discrepancy remains unresolved. Today's acoustic engineering software optimizes spaces for intelligibility and comfort. The geometry it favors often matches Novak's ratios. His name does not appear in the code. These mechanisms do not shout their purpose. They hum, softly, beneath centuries of plaster and paint. If history is written by survivors who inherited the designs without the instructions.
Yep, 100%.
On 16th of March 1931, in a chilly dawn inside Notre Dame de Paris, technicians from a prominent organ firm began a major retuning. Electric light buzzed faintly. The old gas lamps had been removed. The official contract for the work, preserved in the cathedral's archives, describes modernization, standardization of pitch, and improvements in clarity. A folded appendix tucked into the same folder, stamped but unsigned. Lists tones to be reduced, with notes like too oppressive in nave. Induces drowsiness in certain listeners. Several of these tones correspond by modern calculation to low frequencies identified today as having measurable effects on heart rate and brainwaves. The appendix bears no date, but the paper and typeface match documents from 1929. A former chorister, interviewed on tape in 1970, recalls, after they fixed the organ, the sound was cleaner, but it no longer wrapped around you the same way. The old priest said it was better for understanding the words. Some of us missed the way it made you feel. Wind rattles the scaffolding outside. Inside, the camera drifts through the dim nave, comparing early 20th century recordings of the organ's thick, enveloping chords with later...
It's also interesting how much information the Catholic, the Pope actually knows about these kinds of things. They're keeping, hush-hush on a lot of things.
Sharper, more articulate sound. The difference is subtle, yet unmistakable. A small contradiction appears. A Paris newspaper from 1930 mentions retuning already underway, while the cathedral contract states work beginning in 1931. Somewhere between the articles and the signatures, decisions were made off the record. Modern digital organs offer presets labelled cathedral, simulating long reverberation at the push of a button. What they cannot reproduce is the way stone once held certain frequencies, those specifically targeted for reduction. On 4th April 1954, in a clinical research room at the Université de Genève, a team of neurologists exposed volunteers to steady tones in controlled conditions. Their published paper, appearing in a medical journal that same year, describes changes in anxiety, heart rate, and perceived pain. The study cites a lineage of acoustic research stretching back to the early 20th century, Helmholtz, Rayleigh, and others. In the university's archive, however, a cardboard folder labelled Preliminary Studies Not for Publication holds earlier documents, among them a typed translation of an 1890s letter from a Central European physician describing relief of nervous complaints during prolonged mass under certain vaults, and an anonymous memorandum dated 1933 noting similarities between cathedral reverberation profiles and the tones now being tested on patients in enclosed rooms. In the margin of one memo, a red pencil instruction stands out. Strip ecclesiastical context before publication. No signature. A quiet line from an assistant's diary written in 1955 surfaces as voiceover. We joked that the lab was a church without candles. They laughed, but no one wanted to know where the old numbers came from. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. The camera contrasts white-tiled laboratory walls with stone vaults from earlier footage. Oscilloscopes trace sine waves remarkably close to tones once heard beneath domes and towers. Timestamp discrepancies appear in citations. The published paper references field measurements from 1935 that do not appear in any publicly catalogued expedition. Yet those same years coincide with undocumented acoustic evaluations in several European cathedrals undergoing modernization.
And also, like, a lot of these older churches that are still used to, like, ward off demons and shit. Like, you know, the shit they actually used that scene in Spider-Man 3 when, like Venom comes out of, like, Peter Parker, like, due to, like, church bells, like, to the sound. That pattern actually come from the church. Comes from the ancient churches when they use bells to ward off demons and shit. Like, that's where the story parallel comes from. Like, it's crazy.
Hospitals today use sound masking, white noise, and carefully tuned environments to calm patients. The methods are attributed to mid-20th century research. The folder marked "Not for Publication" sits on a shelf. Its edge is worn. On 22nd September 2019, a commuter pauses in the main hall of a modern train station in Berlin. The ceiling arcs overhead in sweeping concrete ribs. Glass panes filter grey daylight into soft, diffused beams. Announcements echo and overlap. Yet somehow the space feels calming rather than chaotic. The official architectural brief, available online, praises its human-centered acoustics. A closer look at the architect's digital models, archived with the City Planning Office and timestamped 2010, reveals imported parameter sets labelled only Cathedral Laro 3 and Nave Long. The firm describes them as legacy reverb templates. No further origin is given. Their values, reverberation time, decay curves, frequencies emphasized, match measurements taken in 19th century cathedrals and basilicas across Europe. Voiceover returns to Novak's old map, overlaying dots from the 1880s with present-day transport hubs, concert halls, and civic buildings. The pattern realigns, similar proportions, similar acoustic sweet spots, now serving commuters instead of pilgrims. A contemporary sound engineer, interviewed informally in 2020, laughs when asked about cathedral acoustics. We borrow from the classics. People feel safe in those spaces. They don't know why, but their bodies do. Rain streaks down the station's glass facade. Inside, a soft low-frequency rumble from distant trains mixes with the hall's natural resonance, creating a familiar, almost devotional hum. For a moment, the camera holds on one commuter who closes their eyes, exhaling as if something inside is unclenched. A final archival contradiction hangs over the montage. In a 19th century cathedral ledger, someone wrote, "removed for modernization," next to a set of resonance cavities. In a 21st century building spec, nearly identical cavities appear under a new name, acoustic comfort modules. The reel seems to stutter. An image of a stone vault fades into a concrete arch, then into the grain of old paper. The frequencies remain, even when their purpose is forgotten. If history is written by survivors, who tune the echoes we still live inside, and why does the film feel as though it cuts, not on an answer, but mid-resonance, with the last frame still vibrating in the dark?
Yeah, this was like a folklore build in marriage tradition. Folklore tradition bells are often associated with the ability to ward off even kill demons and evil spirits. This belief stems from the idea that evil entities hear the sound of bells, particularly church bells, and flee from the ringing. This belief is prevalent in the European folklore, with bells used to dispel storms, protect the newly parted, and ward off malevolent spirits. Sitting over the sound world is from the old world. Like, these bells have intentional purpose. It's used to ward off demonic spirits. Like, it's crazy. So a lot of our history is actually being hidden. A lot of the purpose and intentionality of things actually indicated through the churches are being hidden. Possibly with the satanic overlords actually run our fucking worlds and shit. So that's about it. If you don't know, now you know.